My name is Victoria, and I am 30 years old. 11 years ago, my father stood on the porch of our Connecticut estate and watched a taxi pull away with me in it. He did not wave. He did not offer a dime for the subway or a deposit for a bedroom. He handed me a $50 bill and a prepaid flip phone with the words, "Self-Reliance is the only inheritance we owe you. No college fund, no safety net, nothing." For over a decade, I was the daughter who didn't exist. I slept on a floor in Queens, worked triple shifts at a diner, and clawed my way into a senior vice presidency in Manhattan without a single phone call from home. Then last month, my phone vibrated in the middle of a board meeting. It was him. After 3 years of silence, my father was not calling to apologize or to ask if I was alive. He was calling because his bank accounts were empty, and he needed a $450,000 loan to save his reputation. Before we get into the layers of this betrayal, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Hazel Tells Stories if this narrative resonates with your own life. Also, drop your age in the comments below. I want to see how many of us are building our own legacies from nothing. The wind off the Hudson River is sharp enough to cut skin, but it feels like a warm breeze compared to the voice in my ear. I am standing outside my office in Hudson Yards, looking at a city I conquered while my father was busy losing his. Thomas sounds small. The man who used to command rooms with a single look now sounds like he is drowning in his own expensive scotch. He mentions a bridge loan. He mentions the Hamptons house. He speaks as if we are colleagues discussing a minor clerical error, rather than a father begging the child he discarded for a lifeline. I look at my reflection in the glass of the high-rise. I am wearing an $800 wool coat and carrying a bag that costs more than the car he let me drive in high school. The irony is a physical weight in my chest. He tells me he needs the money by Friday or the foreclosure notice becomes public. He calls it an investment in the family legacy. I want to ask him where that legacy was when I was 19 and begging for $2,000 to cover my tuition gap. I want to remind him that he told me to find a scholarship or a sugar daddy because he was finished being my ATM. Instead, I stay silent. I let the New York traffic fill the gap. I realize in this moment that the conflict is not about the money. It is about the fact that the man who taught me that asking for help is a weakness is now the weakest man I know. I tell him I will meet him for dinner not because I want to help, but because I want to see the look in his eyes when he realizes I am the only one left with the power to say no. This is not a reunion. This is a hostile takeover. I choose a corner booth at a dark mahogany bistro in Midtown, a place where the air smells like expensive cigars and desperation. Julian is already there, his hands trembling as he grips a glass of neat scotch. He is 26 now, but he looks 40. The skin under his eyes is bruised with exhaustion, and his tailored suit hangs off his frame like he has been shrinking. While I was scrubbing grease off industrial stovetops in a Queens diner to pay for my night classes at NYU, Julian was the crown prince of the Connecticut estate. He was the one who got the brand new Jeep on his 16th birthday and the European backpacking trip after graduation. He stayed behind in the warmth of our father's approval while I was freezing in a walk-up apartment with no heat. Now he looks at me with a mixture of awe and resentment. He sees the success, the sharp lines of my confidence, and the way the waiter treats me with immediate respect. He does not see the scars from a decade of being nobody's daughter. He clears his throat, the sound dry and nervous. "Victoria, thank God you came," he whispers. "I do not order a drink. I do not want to be comfortable. I want to remain focused." I ask him how bad it is. Julian takes a jagged swallow of his drink and leans in. "They are underwater, Vic. It is not just the bridge loan for the Hamptons. The tech startups Dad dumped the liquid assets into have completely cratered. The Connecticut house is in pre-foreclosure. The bank sent the final notice yesterday." I feel a cold, sharp laugh bubble up in my throat. It is the sound of a woman who has seen the bottom of the barrel and survived it. I remind him of my 19th birthday. I tell him about the night I sat at the kitchen table with our father showing him the tuition statement. I only needed $2,000 to bridge the gap for my sophomore year. $2,000 was the cost of one of my father's watches. He looked at me with those granite eyes and told me that if I wanted an education, I should find a scholarship or a sugar daddy because he was finished being my ATM. He said that a woman with true grit would figure it out. He called my struggle an opportunity for character building. Now the man who preached the gospel of self-reliance is sending his golden son to do his dirty work. Julian flinches at my tone. He tries to defend them, saying that things were different back then and that the economy was more stable. I cut him off. I tell him that the only thing that was different back then was that they had a daughter they could afford to throw away. The resentment in the room is a third person sitting at the table, cold and unyielding. But as I get up to leave, Julian reaches out and grabs my wrist. His eyes are wide with a sudden panicked honesty. "Wait," he says, "there is more." You think he just lost his own money. He did not. He spent the last 3 years dipping into the family trusts to cover his margins. I stop moving. I look down at his hand until he releases me. I ask him what trusts he is talking about. My father always maintained that there was no family money for the next generation. He claimed he was a self-made man who started with nothing, which was the justification for giving me nothing. Julian looks at the table, unable to meet my gaze. He tells me that our grandmother, the one Thomas claimed died penniless, actually left a significant educational trust for both of us. It was a secondary safety net intended to vest when we turned 21. My heart stops for a second. While I was taking out high-interest predatory student loans and working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over my head, there was a fund sitting there with my name on it. I asked Julian why I never saw a dime of it. He tells me that our father convinced the trustees that I had become a flight risk and a substance abuser when I left home at 19. He used my forced independence as evidence that I was unstable. Then he used his position as the executor to borrow against the principal. He gambled away my grandmother's legacy to fund his failing ego. He didn't just cut me off. He stole the one thing that was legally mine. The betrayal shifts from a cold memory to an active, burning fire. I look at Julian and realize he has known about this for years. He probably used his portion of the trust to pay for his frat parties and his luxury apartment while I was counting pennies for a subway fare. The golden child was living off my stolen inheritance. I feel a surge of rage that makes my vision blur, but I force it down. I am a woman of logic, of numbers, and of strategy. I realize that my father did not just want me to be self-reliant. He wanted me to be so desperate that I would never look into the family finances. He wanted me gone so he could pick my pockets in the dark. Julian starts to plead again, saying that we can still save the family name if I just provide the bridge loan. He says we can fix the trust later once the market rebounds. I look at my little brother and see a ghost. I see a man who has never had to fight for anything, now begging the person he helped rob to save him from the consequences of his own greed. I stand up slowly, smoothing the front of my coat. I tell Julian that I will attend the dinner at the house on Friday. I tell him to make sure our father is there. I do not tell him that I am not coming to save the house. I am coming to see the crime scene. As I walk out of the bistro, the New York evening is loud and chaotic, but my mind is perfectly still. Every struggle I went through, every night I went to bed hungry, and every time I felt like a failure because I couldn't afford a textbook, was a calculated choice made by my father. He didn't just let me fall. He pushed me and then charged me for the air on the way down. But there is a new conflict brewing in the back of my mind. If Julian knows about the trusts, what else is he hiding? He looked too haggard for someone who was just worried about his parents. He looked like a man who was running from his own shadow. I realize that the family estate is not just a house in pre-foreclosure. It is a house of cards, and I am the only one with the wind to blow it down. I walk toward the subway, ignoring the taxis. I want to feel the grime of the city one more time before I go back to that mansion. I want to remember exactly who I am and where I came from before I show them exactly what their version of self-reliance has created. The dinner on Friday will not be about a loan. It will be about the beginning of the end for the empire of Thomas. and I'm going to enjoy every second of the collapse. The drive from Manhattan to the gated communities of Connecticut usually feels like a transition into a world of quiet permanence. But as my car rolls up the winding driveway of my childhood home, the silence feels heavy and wrong. This house was once a fortress of American excess, a sprawling colonial with shutters that were always freshly painted and a lawn that looked like it was manicured with a pair of scissors. Now the gravel crunches under my tires with a hollow sound. I notice the weeds choking the flower beds first. Then, as I round the final bend, I see it. Tucked behind a thick, untrimmed boxwood hedge is a wooden post with a weathered sign that says "For Sale." They didn't even have the dignity to put it out front where the neighbors could see. They are hiding their failure behind the greenery, clinging to the ghost of a reputation that has already expired. I park the car and sit for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The last time I stood on this porch, I was 19, holding a single suitcase and watching the door lock. I am no longer that girl. I am a woman who understands balance sheets better than my father ever did. Yet my heart still thuds against my ribs with a rhythm of old familiar fear. I step out and the front door opens before I can reach for the knocker. My mother, Beatrice, stands in the foyer. To a stranger, she looks like the quintessential suburban matriarch, but my eyes are trained to spot the discrepancies. She is wearing a silk twin set and her signature double strand of pearls, but as I lean in for a dry, air-kissed greeting, I notice the luster is off. They are high-quality glass fakes. The real ones were likely sold months ago to pay the country club dues. Her smile is brittle, a thin layer of porcelain over a shattering foundation. She tells me I look tired, which is her code for saying I look like I work for a living. She leads me into the dining room and the atmosphere is stifling. The house is strangely quiet. Usually there would be the sounds of a caterer in the kitchen or the hum of the central vacuum, but today there is only the ticking of a grandfather clock that is 5 minutes slow. The dining table is set with the fine Haviland china and sterling silver, but the smell filling the room isn't roasted lamb or expensive herbs. It is the salty MSG heavy scent of cheap Thai takeout. They are serving noodles on heirloom porcelain. It is a pathetic attempt to maintain the facade of wealth, a desperate grasp at a lifestyle that has already slipped through their fingers. Thomas is already seated at the head of the table, his posture as rigid as a military officer. He doesn't stand when I enter. He doesn't ask about my life in the city or the firm I helped build. He looks at me over the rim of his glasses and tells me he saw my recent profile in a trade magazine. He says the tone was aggressive. He claims that a woman in my position should focus more on grace and less on being a disruptor. It is a classic opening move. Before he asks for the money, he has to diminish my value. He has to remind me that no matter how many millions I manage for my clients, I am still the daughter he found wanting. I pull out my own chair and sit, refusing to wait for his permission. I tell him that aggression is what pays for the coat I just hung in his hallway. The air in the room turns frigid. Beatrice fusses with the napkins, her hands shaking as she scoops pad thai onto a plate that costs more than a monthly car payment. The psychological warfare has begun, and the first casualty is the pretense of a family dinner. We eat in a silence so thick it feels like it might choke us. Thomas chews slowly, staring at a spot on the wall just above my head. Julian is absent, likely hiding in his wing of the house to avoid the fallout. Finally, my father puts his fork down with a deliberate clink. He doesn't lead with an apology. He doesn't mention the grandmother's trust or the 11 years of silence. He reaches into the breast pocket of his blazer and pulls out a folded legal document. He slides it across the table over the silver and the takeout containers until it stops right in front of my plate. I don't touch it. I look at him and ask what it is. He clears his throat, the sound of a man trying to maintain authority while his world is on fire. He tells me it is a promissory note. He says he needs $450,000 by 5 o'clock on Friday. He explains that a series of unfortunate market fluctuations has created a temporary liquidity crisis. If the funds aren't wired by the deadline, the bank will seize the estate and everything in it. He leans forward, his eyes narrowing. He tells me this is an opportunity for me to invest in the family legacy. He says he is giving me the chance to prove I actually care about the name I carry. I pick up the paper. It isn't a request, it is a demand disguised as a contract. The terms are insulting. There is no collateral listed, no interest rate, just a vague promise of repayment when his mysterious investments mature. He is asking me to throw nearly $500,000 into a black hole because of a legacy that consists of him throwing me out in the rain. I look at my mother hoping for a shred of maternal guilt, but she is staring at her fake pearls, her lips pressed into a bloodless line. She is his accomplice. She watched him steal my grandmother's money, and she watched him exile me, and now she is watching him try to rob me again. I realize in this moment that they don't see me as a daughter. They see me as a late-stage insurance policy. The audacity of the move is breathtaking. He thinks that because he gave me life, he owns the fruits of my labor. He thinks the guilt of seeing this house sold will be enough to make me sign away my hard-earned security. I set the document down and look him straight in the eye. I tell him that $450,000 is a very specific number. I ask him if that includes the back taxes he owes, or if this is just to stop the bleeding on the primary mortgage. Thomas bristles his face, flushing a deep, dangerous purple. He tells me that the details are not my concern, and that I should be grateful he is coming to me at all. He says he could have gone to his colleagues, but he wanted to keep this in the family. I laugh, and the sound echoes through the empty house. I remind him that he didn't want me in the family when I needed $2,000 for books. I ask him why his colleagues won't lend him the money. Is it because they know his name is mud on Wall Street? Is it because they've seen his balance sheets and realized he is a sinking ship? The tension escalates until it is a physical pressure. He slams his hand on the table, making the fine china rattle. He yells that I am an ungrateful child who doesn't understand the pressures of maintaining a life like this. Just as the argument reaches a breaking point, a heavy thud comes from the floor above us. Beatrice gasps and covers her mouth. Thomas freezes his hand, still pressed against the table. It isn't the sound of a door closing. It is the sound of furniture being moved. My father tries to play it off as the house settling, but the look of pure terror in my mother's eyes tells a different story. I realize then that there is someone else here, or something else happening, that they haven't told me about. The $450,000 isn't just for the house. There is a new conflict lurking in the shadows of the second-floor one that they are trying to drown out with their shouting. I stand up, pushing my chair back. I tell them I need to wash my hands before I even consider looking at the note again. Thomas tries to stop me, telling me to sit back down and finish the discussion, but I'm already moving toward the hallway. I am not going to the bathroom. I am going to find out what is actually happening in this house. The invitation to the lion's den wasn't just about a loan. It was a trap, and I am about to find out how deep the teeth go. As I reach the stairs, I hear my father's voice drop to a low, desperate hiss as he berates my mother for not locking a door. The air is thick with secrets, and I am seconds away from uncovering the first one. I leave the dining room behind the sound of my father's sharp, condescending voice fading as he begins to berate my mother about the lack of wine. Their bickering is a practiced dance, a distraction they have used for decades to cover the cracks in their foundation. I do not head for the guest bathroom. Instead, I pivot toward the back of the house, my heels silent on the thick Persian runners until I reach the heavy oak door of my father's study. This room was always off-limits, a sanctuary of mahogany leather-bound books he never read and the scent of expensive pipe tobacco. To me, it was a tomb where he buried his humanity in exchange for a sense of local importance. I turn the brass handle and slip inside, the air smelling of dust and stagnant ambition. The desk is a massive slab of cherry wood, cluttered with overdue notices from the country club and glossy brochures for luxury yachts he can no longer afford. I am looking for the truth behind that $450,000 figure, but what I find is a different kind of wreckage. In the bottom drawer, tucked behind a stack of tax returns from the early 2000s, is a manila folder with my initials scrawled on the tab in his cramped, arrogant handwriting. V. Legacy. For a split second, a foolish, childish part of me hopes it is a collection of my old school reports or a secret stash of newspaper clippings from my recent promotions. I think maybe despite the exile, he was proud. I open the folder and the air leaves my lungs. There are no mementos here. There are credit card applications, shell company registrations, and secondary bank accounts. Every single one of them is in my name. Every single one was opened after my 19th birthday. While I was struggling to build a credit score from scratch so I could rent a 500-square-foot studio in a dangerous neighborhood, my father was using my social security number as a financial trash bin. He had been shielding his secondary assets from creditors by burying them under my identity. He didn't just cut me off and leave me to drown. He used my name as a life raft for his own sinking greed while I was sleeping on a moth-eaten mattress in Queens. The documents reveal a systematic exploitation that makes my stomach churn. He had taken out a predatory bridge loan in my name 3 years ago, forging my signature with a chillingly accurate hand. He used my clean record to secure interest rates he could never get on his own, then let the accounts languish when the investments failed. I see the notices from collection agencies sent to a P.O. box I never knew existed. The cruelty is breathtaking. He sat at that dinner table and spoke about character building and self-reliance while he was actively sabotaging my financial future behind my back. He let me suffer through the indignity of being rejected for a car loan because of mysterious debt I didn't recognize, debt I assumed was a banking error I would eventually fix. It wasn't an error. It was my father. He treated my very existence as a line of credit he could draw upon whenever his own ego outstripped his bank account. The grief I felt earlier, that soft, lingering sadness for the family I lost, crystallizes into a cold, diamond-hard rage. I am no longer a daughter looking for answers. I am a predator who has found the scent of blood. I grab a particularly damning loan agreement, one that ties his personal spending to a fraudulent account in my name, and tuck it deep into my designer purse. This is my leverage. This is the evidence of a felony that could put him in a federal prison for a very long time. I am about to close the drawer when the door creaks open. I freeze my hand still on the mahogany handle. I expect my father ready for a final violent confrontation. Instead, Julian slips into the room. He looks even worse in the dim light of the study, his eyes darting toward the desk with a hungry, desperate light. He doesn't look surprised to see me there. He looks relieved, as if he thinks I am in here looking for a checkbook to save him. He approaches me, his voice a frantic whisper that makes my skin crawl. "Vic, thank God," he says. "You have to talk to him. He cut off my monthly allowance last week. I can't pay the lease on the Porsche, and my landlord is threatening to kick me out of the city apartment. You have the money now. Just give him the loan so he can start my payments again. I will make it up to you, I promise." I look at my brother and see the final rotting fruit of my father's labor. Julian isn't here to protect the family or even to help our parents stay in their home. He is here to beg for his crumbs. He doesn't care that our father identity thefted his own daughter. He probably doesn't even care if the house is sold as long as his lifestyle remains subsidized. The sibling bond I had tried to nurture in my heart, the idea that we were two survivors of a cold household, is officially severed. He is not a survivor. He is a parasite. I realized that the golden child stayed close to the flame not out of love, but out of a calculated need for warmth. I asked him if he knew about the folder. I asked him if he knew Dad was using my name to hide his debts. Julian looks away, his silence giving me all the confirmation I need. He knew. He watched me struggle from the comfort of his paid-for life and said nothing because he didn't want to jeopardize his own seat at the table. He is just as guilty as the man in the dining room. The conflict in the room shifts from a quiet discovery to a sharp, jagged confrontation. I tell Julian that he is pathetic. I tell him that he has spent his entire life being a shadow of a man who doesn't even exist anymore. He gets angry, then his face contorting with a weak, spoiled fury. He tells me I am selfish because I have a career and a high-rise office. He says I owe it to the family to fix this, because I am the only one who actually made something of myself. The irony is so thick I can almost taste it. They want the daughter they discarded to use the strength she gained from their abandonment to carry them all. I step toward him, and for the first time in his life, Julian looks afraid of me. I am not the sister who used to make him cocoa when he was scared of the dark. I am the woman who just found the weapon that will destroy his world. I tell him to get out of my way. I tell him that if he mentions my presence in this office to our father before I am ready, I will make sure his lease is the very first thing the bank terminates tomorrow morning. He cowers, stepping back against the bookshelf, and I walk out of the study with the gait of a general. The house feels different now. The overgrown lawn, the fake pearls, and the cheap takeout are no longer just signs of a financial downturn. They are the evidence of a moral bankruptcy that goes deeper than any bank account. As I head back toward the dining room, I can hear my father's voice rising in the kitchen again. He is shouting about the cost of the wine, oblivious to the fact that the daughter he thinks he is about to manipulate is carrying the proof of his crimes in her handbag. The new conflict is already forming in my mind. I am not going to give him a loan. I am going to give him an ultimatum. But as I reach the doorway, I see a man I don't recognize standing in the foyer, talking to my mother in a low, urgent tone. He is wearing a cheap suit and carrying a briefcase, and my mother looks like she is about to faint. The layers of this disaster are deeper than even the folder suggested. There is another player on the board, and the $450,000 might not be the only debt my father is hiding. I pause in the shadows, listening, my heart a cold stone in my chest. The night is far from over, and the drama is only beginning to peak. I step back into the dining room with a heavy rhythmic stride that commands the space. The man in the foyer has vanished into the kitchen with my mother, their hushed whispers sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. My father is back at the head of the table, nursing a glass of wine that looks like the only thing keeping him upright. He looks up as I enter, his expression shifting back into that mask of practiced authority. He taps the promissory note on the table with a manicured fingernail. He tells me that time is a luxury we do not have, and that I should stop playing games and sign the document. I do not sit down. I stand at the opposite end of the table, the light from the crystal chandelier casting sharp shadows across my face. I reach into my bag and pull out the predatory loan agreement I took from his study, the one with my forged signature and his hidden bank account details. I lay it down directly over his note. The paper is crisp, the white surface glaring against the dark wood. The air leaves the room in a single collective gasp. Thomas stares at the document, and for a heartbeat the silence is absolute. Then his face begins to turn a mottled, dangerous purple, the classic American patriarch realizing his grip on the narrative has just been severed. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't even flinch. He looks at the paper and then looks at me, his eyes narrowing into cold slits of defiance. He tells me I had no right to go through his private files. He claims that everything he did was for the long-term stability of the family name. Then comes the gaslighting delivered with a smooth, oily conviction that makes my skin crawl. He leans forward and tells me that he actually protected me by keeping my name on those accounts. He sneers that I wouldn't have worked half as hard as I did if I had known I was a millionaire on paper at 21. He has the audacity to suggest that my success is a result of his theft. He claims he gave me the gift of hunger, the drive to prove him wrong while he was secretly using my credit to stay afloat. The tragedy of it hits me with the force of a physical blow. My success wasn't just built despite their abandonment. It was fueled by a lie they managed behind the curtain. He wants credit for my scars, or he wants me to thank him for the knife he kept in my back while I was climbing the mountain. My mother wanders back into the room, her face a pale mask of terror. She sees the document on the table and collapses into her chair, her hand flying to her throat to touch the fake pearls. She doesn't cry for me. She doesn't weep because her husband spent a decade destroying her daughter's financial life. She begins to sob because the man in the foyer was a process server, and she is terrified that the neighbors will see the flashing lights of a squad car if this goes any further. She whimpers about the upcoming charity auction and how she can't show her face if the house is seized. The vanity of her grief is the final straw. I look at these two people, the architects of my oldest nightmares, and I realize they are nothing more than ghosts in expensive clothes. They are paper tigers in a house of cards. The power dynamic shifts in an instant, the weight of the room moving from the head of the table to where I stand. I am the only person in this house with a positive net worth and a clean record. I am the only one who can stop the bank from changing the locks on Friday. I tell them to be quiet. My voice is low, steady, and devoid of the anger that usually gives them leverage. I tell them that I have the $450,000. I have it in a liquid account ready to be wired. Beatrice lets out a ragged sigh of relief, reaching for my hand, but I pull back. I tell them that the conditions for this money will be market standard. I am not a daughter giving a gift. I am a lender conducting a hostile takeover of a failing asset. Thomas tries to interrupt, claiming he won't be dictated to by his own child in his own house. I remind him that by 5 o'clock on Friday, it isn't his house anymore. I tell him that if he wants my money, he will agree to a full audit of every account associated with my social security number. I tell him that I want a seat on the board of his remaining holding company and that I want the deed to the Connecticut property as collateral. He looks at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He calls me a vulture. I tell him that I am exactly what he raised me to be, someone who knows the value of $1 and exactly how to take it from someone who doesn't. The hierarchy of the family is officially dead. Thomas sits back, his shoulders slumped for the first time in his life. He realizes that the daughter he threw away is the only person who can keep him out of a federal courtroom. He is trapped between his pride and his freedom, and we both know which one he will choose. But as I prepare to lay out the rest of my terms, Julian stumbles into the room, his face flushed and his breath smelling of the scotch he stole from the study. He is waving his phone in the air, yelling about a news alert that just broke regarding the tech startups our father invested in. He says it wasn't just a market crash. He says there is an active investigation into wire fraud involving the lead investors. My father's face goes from purple to a sickly, translucent gray. The conflict shifts again, growing larger and more terrifying than a simple mortgage crisis. If the federal government is looking at those startups, they are going to look at every name on every account associated with the funding. And because my father used my identity to shield his assets, my name is the one they are going to find first. I look at the loan agreement on the table and realize that the trap is much bigger than I thought. My father didn't just want my money to save the house. He wanted my money to hire a defense attorney, and he wanted my signature on a new set of documents that would make me the primary responsible party for the fraud. He was trying to buy my silence and my soul with my own $450,000. The betrayal is so deep it feels like vertigo. I am not just a lender in this situation. I am a potential defendant in a crime I didn't commit. I look at Thomas and ask him exactly how much of that money was going to the bank and how much was going to a retainer for a lawyer. He can't look me in the eye. The silence is my answer. I realize that the only way to save myself is to destroy him completely before the feds arrive. The new conflict is a race against time. I have 72 hours to dismantle his legal shield and separate my identity from his crimes before the knock comes at the door. I turn to leave, but Thomas stands up, his voice cracking with a sudden desperate plea. He tells me that if I leave now, he will tell the investigators that the accounts were my idea from the start. He is going to frame me to save himself. The drama hasn't just increased, it has become a war for my survival. I pause at the doorway, my mind already calculating the next 10 moves. He thinks he can threaten me with the truth he fabricated, but he forgets one thing: I have been living in the shadows he created for 11 years. I know how to navigate the dark better than he ever will. I stand in the center of the dining room and watch the man who gave me my name try to use it as a shield for his crimes. The threat of him framing me for his wire fraud hangs in the air like poison gas. He actually believes he can manipulate the federal government as easily as he manipulated a 19-year-old girl. My mind flashes back to the winter of 2016. I remember the bone-deep exhaustion of working 48-hour weekend shifts as a waitress at a Greasy Spoon in Brooklyn while carrying 18 credits at the university. I remember the smell of industrial degreaser on my skin and the way my hands would shake from too much caffeine and too little sleep. I was a ghost moving through the city fueled by nothing but the desperate need to prove that I could survive without his permission. That was the year I won the scholarship for disadvantaged youth. It was $5,000, a small sum to a man like Thomas, but to me, it was the difference between finishing my junior year and dropping out to live in a shelter. It was the only moment of grace I had experienced in years of darkness. I mention the scholarship now, my voice cutting through his frantic threats like a scalpel. I remind him of the day I called to tell him I had won it, thinking that perhaps a small piece of his pride might still exist for me. Thomas doesn't look ashamed. He scoffs the sound a wet, ugly rattle in his throat. He tells me that he remembers that little trophy. He calls it charity for the weak and a handout for people who lack the grit to compete in the real world. He says that relying on the pity of a board of trustees is the first step toward a lifetime of mediocrity. He is still trying to play the role of the rugged individualist, even as he begs for a loan from the very person he insulted. But I am not finished. I tell him that I spent the afternoon on a conference call with a former member of that scholarship board, an old colleague of mine, who finally felt comfortable telling me the truth after all these years. The twist makes the room go cold. I reveal that back in 2016, an anonymous donor who sat on several prestigious local boards tried to have my scholarship revoked. This person claimed I came from a wealthy background and was defrauding the system. They spent weeks sending letters and making calls to the dean of students trying to block the only financial lifeline I had. I look Thomas in the eye and tell him that I have the emails now. The anonymous donor was him. He wasn't just indifferent to my struggle, he was actively working to sabotage my success from the shadows. He didn't want me to be independent or self-reliant. He wanted me to fail quickly, so I would be forced to crawl back to this house and become a quiet, obedient housewife who lived under his thumb. He wanted me broken because a broken daughter is easier to control than a successful one. He didn't just forget to provide a safety net. He saw me falling and reached out to shred the net before I hit the ground. The cruelty of it is so layered that it almost feels like a work of fiction. He spent money on legal maneuvers to keep me poor while he was losing his own fortune on ego-driven investments. He valued his dominance over my future more than he valued my survival. I look at my mother waiting for a reaction to this level of depravity. Beatrice lets out a long, dramatic sigh and leans back in her chair. She doesn't comment on the fact that her husband tried to destroy their daughter's education. Instead, she touches the skin around her eyes and complains that this level of stress is going to ruin her recent Botox treatment. She says she can feel the tension causing new wrinkles, and that her dermatologist is going to charge her double for the emergency touch-up. The absurd vanity of her suffering provides a brief dark flash of humor. They are losing their home, their reputation, and their souls, but she is worried about the smooth surface of her forehead. It highlights the hollow core of their existence. They are not real people. They are just a collection of expensive procedures and stolen legacies. Thomas tries to pivot, realizing that the scholarship revelation has stripped him of his last bit of moral high ground. He tells me that he did it for my own good. He claims that if I had received that handout, I never would have developed the killer instinct that made me a vice president. He tries to frame his malice as a form of tough love, a masterclass in psychological conditioning. I tell him that he is a sociopath. I tell him that he didn't give me a killer instinct. He gave me a reason to never trust another human being as long as I live. He didn't build a champion. He built an enemy. The conflict in the room is no longer about a bridge loan or a mortgage. It is about the fundamental definition of our relationship. He thinks he is a mentor who went too far. I know he is a criminal who stayed too long. The drama escalates when the front door chime rings again. Julian jumps as if he has been shot. My mother starts to hyperventilate, clutching her fake pearls so hard the string looks like it might snap. We all freeze, staring at the hallway. This isn't the process server. This is someone else. Thomas looks at me, his eyes wide with a sudden primitive fear. He whispers that I have to answer it. He says that if it is the bank or the authorities, I am the only one who can talk our way out of it, because of my professional standing. The irony is complete. The man who tried to block my path to a career now wants to hide behind the very title he tried to prevent me from earning. I stand up, but I don't go to the door. I tell him that if I open that door, I am doing it as a representative of my firm, not as his daughter. I tell him that every word I say will be recorded and used to protect my own interests, not his. I walk toward the foyer, the sound of my heels echoing through the silent, overgrown estate. I can hear Thomas and Beatrice arguing in hushed, frantic tones behind me. He is telling her to hide the silver, and she is crying about her reputation at the country club. They are deck chairs on the Titanic, arguing about the seating arrangement while the water rises. I reach the door and look through the side glass. There is a black SUV idling in the driveway, its headlights cutting through the Connecticut mist. A man in a dark suit is standing on the porch, holding a folder that looks much more official than a standard foreclosure notice. This isn't just about the house anymore. The ghost of my scholarship was just the beginning of the secrets Thomas has been keeping. As I reach for the handle, I realize that the next conflict isn't going to stay inside these four walls. The outside world has finally come for the family legacy, and I am the only one standing in the way of the collision. I open the door and the man asks for Thomas by his full legal name. He doesn't mention me, he doesn't know who I am, and that is exactly how I plan to keep it until the trap is fully set. I close the heavy front door on the man in the dark suit, the weight of the legal summons in my hand, feeling like a physical weapon. The SUV remains in the driveway, its engine humming a low, predatory tune as it waits for a response that will never come. I walk back into the dining room, where the air is so thick with desperation that it feels like breathing through wet wool. Thomas is standing now, his knuckles white as he leans against the mahogany table, looking at me as if I am the one who brought the wolves to his porch. I do not give him the satisfaction of a report. I do not tell him about the document I just tucked into the pocket of my coat. Instead, I walk back to my position at the end of the table and place my hands flat on the surface. I tell him that I have made my decision. I tell him that the $450,000 is ready to move, but the price of my intervention has just gone up. The terms I lay out are cold, precise, and entirely devoid of familial sentiment. I tell my father that I will pay the bank, but in exchange, I want the deed to this house. I want the title, the land, and the right to change the locks by sunset tomorrow. Thomas reacts as if I have struck him across the face. He explodes, his voice reaching a pitch I haven't heard since the night he threw me out. He screams that this house is his identity. He rants about the 30 years he spent building this estate and the prestige it brings to the family name. He calls me a traitor and a scavenger, accusing me of trying to profit from his temporary misfortune. He claims that a home is more than wood and stone, forgetting that he was the one who turned it into a prison for me. I watch him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a dying specimen. His ego is so intertwined with this structure that he cannot see the rot in the foundation. I counter his outburst with the freezing logic of a New York executive. I tell him that in 72 hours his identity is going to belong to the bank. I remind him that when the sheriff arrives to serve the final eviction notice, the country club won't care about his 30 years of history. They will care about the headlines in the local paper. I lean in and tell him that if he signs the deed over to me tonight, he gets to keep his memberships for one more season. He can tell the neighbors that he sold the house to his successful daughter as part of a strategic estate planning move. I am offering him the one thing he values more than money, the ability to lie to his peers. I am giving him a graceful exit from a burning building, but I am keeping the land it sits on. The power dynamic has fully flipped. He is no longer the patriarch granting an audience to a wayward child. He is a failing debtor negotiating with a hostile lender who knows exactly how many skeletons are in his closet. The room falls into a heavy, vibrating silence. My mother is staring at her plate, her fake pearls clicking against the edge of the table as she trembles. Before Thomas can find his voice again, Julian decides to play the diplomat. He stands up, smoothing his disheveled hair, and tries to inject a tone of reason into the chaos. He suggests that we split the difference. He proposes that I provide the loan and take a minority share in the property, allowing our parents to retain control, while I secure my investment. He calls it a compromise that benefits everyone. He smiles at me, the same practiced, charming grin he used whenever he wanted me to do his chores when we were children. He thinks he is still the golden boy who can talk his way out of a crisis. He thinks he is still protected by the shield of our father's favoritism. I turn my gaze to my brother, and the smile vanishes from his face. I tell him that I am not in the business of compromising with people who have nothing to offer. I reveal that I spent my lunch hour yesterday reviewing a certain set of credit reports that he didn't think I could access. I tell our parents about Julian's secret gambling debts, the ones he has been hiding behind a series of payday loans and fraudulent credit cards. I mention the offshore betting accounts and the fact that he has been stealing from the house's maintenance fund to cover his losses at the underground poker games in the city. Julian's face drains of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray that matches the dying lawn outside. He tries to stammer a denial, but I have the receipts in my mind and the fire in my eyes. The house is officially a nest of vipers, and I am the only one standing in the room with the anti-venom. My mother lets out a sharp, choked sob, finally realizing that her perfect son is just as broken as her husband. Thomas looks at Julian with a mixture of disgust and recognition, seeing his own failures reflected in the next generation. The betrayal is complete. The family unit has dissolved into a group of individuals fighting over a dwindling pile of scraps. I tell them that my offer is final and it is non-negotiable. They have 10 minutes to decide if they want to keep their dignity or their deed. I walk away from the table and go into the kitchen, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of their shared guilt. I stand by the window looking out at the dark woods that border the property. I realize that I don't even want this house. I want the satisfaction of knowing that they can only stay here because I allowed it. I want them to feel the same crushing weight of dependency that I felt every day for 11 years. I hear their voices rising and falling in the other room, a frantic chorus of accusations and pleas. Thomas is yelling at Julian about the gambling, and my mother is crying about the shame of it all. They are finally being honest with each other, but only because I forced them into a corner. There is no love in their honesty, only the fear of being exposed. I look at the clock on the wall, the second hand, ticking away the final moments of their reign. I am ready to leave, ready to drive back to the city and let them deal with the wolves, but then I hear a sound from the basement that stops my breath. It is a rhythmic metallic tapping, followed by the muffled sound of a woman's voice. My father told me the house was empty except for them. He told me the staff had been let go weeks ago. But that sound isn't coming from a machine. It is coming from the one part of the house I haven't visited yet. I walk back into the dining room, my eyes fixed on Thomas. I ask him who else is in this house. He tries to laugh it off, saying it's just the old pipes or the heating system. He tells me I'm being paranoid, but the look in his eyes is different now. It isn't just anger or pride. It is a raw, terrifying desperation. He moves to stand between me and the basement door, his hand gripping the back of a chair. I realize that the $450,000 and the deed were just the surface of the conflict. There is something in the dark under our feet that he is willing to lose everything to hide. I take a step toward him, my mind already racing through the possibilities. If he used my name for fraud, what has he used this house for? The first counteroffer was just the beginning of the negotiation. The real price of his salvation is about to be revealed, and I suspect it is a number that none of us are prepared to pay. I reach for the basement door handle, and for the first time tonight my father doesn't yell. He begs. He drops to his knees and begs me not to open that door. The drama has reached a point of no return, and the next conflict is about to shatter whatever was left of this family. I ignore my father's desperate pleas at the basement door and pivot toward the grand foyer, knowing that the real way to break him is not by uncovering his secrets in the dark, but by dragging him into the light. I tell him that if he wants the $450,000, he must earn it through a public display of submission. The deed to the house is the principal of the debt, but the interest is his pride. I command him to put on his best tuxedo, the one he used to wear when he was the king of the Connecticut social circuit, and prepare to attend the annual gala at my firm in Manhattan. This is the condition he didn't see coming. He tries to argue, claiming that he is too ill or too stressed to mingle with the city elite, but I silence him with a single look at the legal summons on the sideboard. I tell him that he will stand by my side as a proud father, or he will stand in a breadline by Monday morning. He has no choice but to comply, and as I watch him retreat up the stairs to dress, I see the first true cracks in his armor. He is not just losing his money, he is losing the ability to choose how the world sees him. The gala is held at a rooftop venue in Tribeca, where the floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic view of the empire I built while he was busy destroying his own. The room is a sea of black ties, silk gowns, and the hum of high-stakes conversation. This is a gathering of the New York financial elite, the very people Thomas used to dismiss as new money or aggressive upstarts when he was sitting in his ivory tower in Greenwich. Now he is the ghost at the feast. He walks into the room clutching my mother's arm as if she were a flotation device. Beatrice has spent 3 hours on her makeup, trying to hide the hollow look in her eyes, but no amount of expensive foundation can mask the scent of failure. They move through the crowd like two people walking through a minefield, terrified of making a wrong move. I, on the other hand, am in my element. Every person in this room knows my name, and more importantly, they know the value of my signature. I am the host, the victor, and for the first time in my life, I am the one holding the leash. The suffering becomes palpable when the master of ceremonies takes the stage. The room falls silent as my biography is read aloud to the crowd. The speaker mentions the grit it took to rise from a junior analyst to a senior vice president in less than a decade. They speak about my visionary leadership in the fintech sector and the millions I have managed for the firm's most prestigious clients. Then they announce me as the visionary of the year. The applause is deafening, a wall of sound that hits Thomas like a physical blow. He is forced to stand under the spotlight while I am escorted to the podium. He has to clap, he has to smile, he has to play the role of the patriarch who nurtured this talent while everyone in the inner circle knows the truth. They know he cut me off. They know he is a spent force. The humiliation is slow and methodical, 1,000 tiny cuts to his ego as he realizes that his daughter's success is the only thing keeping his name relevant in this room. I accept the award and look directly at my father from the stage. I do not thank him. I thank the city of New York for its hardness and the mentors who actually showed up when I was nothing. I see him flinch, his face a pale mask of repressed fury. When I return to the floor, the real torture begins. We are immediately surrounded by the who is who of Manhattan finance. These are the people Thomas used to look down upon from his country club veranda. Now they are the ones patting him on the back with a patronizing pity that is far worse than open hostility. One of my colleagues, a woman I promoted last year, shakes his hand and tells him he must be so relieved that Victoria took over the family's financial legacy. She says it with a smile that suggests she knows exactly how much of a mess he made. Thomas can only nod and mutter a practiced lie about how he always knew I had the spark. It is a pathetic performance, and I make sure to linger near him so he can feel the full weight of the charade. During the cocktail hour, the tension reaches a breaking point. We are approached by Julian Sterling, a man who was once my father's fiercest business rival and a frequent target of his public ridicule. Sterling is a shark who survived the last 3 market crashes, while my father drowned in his own vanity. He looks at Thomas with a predatory grin, his eyes flickering toward me with genuine respect. He doesn't bother with small talk. He laughs a loud, booming sound that draws the attention of the nearby guests and tells Thomas that he has to hand it to him. He says that using his daughter to cleanse the family name was the smartest move Thomas has made in 20 years. Sterling leans in and tells him that everyone on the street heard about the foreclosure and the legal troubles, but seeing Victoria on that stage tonight makes it all look like a brilliant long-term strategy. He calls Thomas a lucky man to have a daughter who could bail him out of the grave he dug for himself. The silence that follows is a vacuum. Thomas looks like he wants to strike the man, his face turning a dark, bruised shade of red. He is no longer the Lion of Connecticut. He is the trophy on my wall, a decorative piece of history that I am using to bolster my own standing. He realizes in this moment that I didn't bring him here to celebrate my success. I brought him here to witness his own irrelevance. I am the interest on the loan, and I am collecting every cent. Sterling moves on, leaving my father trembling with a rage he cannot express without destroying the last of his facade. Beatrice is whispering to a socialite about a summer trip to Italy that I know they can't afford. Her voice cracking as she tries to maintain the illusion. The absurdity of their vanity in the face of their total collapse would be funny if it weren't so tragic. They are clinging to the wreckage of their status while I am the one holding the rescue line. Just as the gala is winding down and I feel the satisfaction of his total defeat, my assistant approaches me with an urgent look on her face. She hands me a tablet and whispers that a breaking news story has just hit the financial wires. It isn't about the tech startups or the wire fraud. It is a report about a massive undisclosed offshore account that has been flagged by the Treasury Department. The account is linked to the Connecticut estate, but the primary signature on the documents belongs to someone I didn't expect. It isn't Thomas. It isn't my mother. The name on the account belongs to my brother Julian. My heart cold restarts in my chest. While I was focused on crushing my father's pride, my brother has been building a second, more dangerous layer of betrayal beneath our feet. This offshore account is the reason for the tapping in the basement and the desperate phone calls in the night. Julian isn't just a gambler. He is the key to a much larger international catastrophe that could drag us all into a prison cell. I look at Julian across the room. He is laughing with a group of young analysts, looking more confident than I have seen him in weeks. He thinks he is safe because I am focused on our parents. He thinks he has successfully hidden the fact that he was the one who truly liquidated the family's future. I realized that the public humiliation of my father was a distraction I allowed myself to fall for while the real enemy was standing right next to me. The power dynamic shifts once again. I am not just a creditor or a visionary. I am a woman surrounded by traitors on all sides. The new conflict is no longer about the house or the name. It is about an offshore trail that leads directly to a scandal that will make the wire fraud look like a misdemeanor. I walk toward Julian, my steps heavy and deliberate, the award in my hand feeling like a useless piece of glass. The night is far from over, and the real war for survival has only just begun. I catch his eye and the smile vanishes from his face. He knows I have seen it. He knows the hunt has started. The gala had been a hollow victory, a glittery stage where I watched my father wither under the weight of his own obsolescence. But the real rot was waiting for me in the silence of my office. 3 days before the final signing of the $450,000 bailout, I am sitting in my high-back leather chair, the skyline of Manhattan stretching out like a grid of cold, unblinking eyes. My private investigator, a man who specializes in finding the things people bury beneath layers of shell companies and offshore lies, has just sent over an encrypted file. I expected more details on Julian's gambling, or perhaps a deeper look into the tech startup fraud. What I found instead was a second life. Thomas hasn't been entirely honest about where my money is going. It isn't just for the mortgage or the back taxes on the Connecticut estate. The ledger reveals a steady rhythmic bleed of cash directed to a property in Coral Gables, Florida. For 15 years, while I was being told we had no money for my future, Thomas was funding a second household. A woman named Elena, a son named Marcus. A second family I never knew existed was living on the interest of my stolen inheritance. The tragedy deepens with every line of the report I read. This wasn't a recent mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a parallel existence, a sprawling and expensive fraud that spanned 2 states and a decade and a half of calculated deception. I look at the dates of the transfers. He was sending money to Florida the same week he told me I was old enough to figure it out on my own. He was paying for Marcus's private school tuition while I was skipping meals to afford textbooks. The $450,000 he begged for isn't just to save the house where I grew up. It is to pay off a massive quiet settlement to keep this woman from coming forward and destroying what is left of his reputation during the foreclosure proceedings. He didn't just want me to save his home. He wanted me to fund the burial of his biggest secret. The family legacy he spoke of with such hollow reverence was nothing more than a cover story for a man who couldn't be faithful to his own promises. I lean back, the lights of the city blurring as a heat rises in my throat that I refuse to let turn into a sob. I have spent my entire life trying to understand why I wasn't enough for him. I thought it was because I was too headstrong, too much like him, or perhaps just a disappointment to his vision of a perfect daughter. Now I see that I was never the problem. I was simply an inconvenient witness to his dual reality. But the most jagged piece of this discovery is the realization about my mother. I recall Beatrice's brittle behavior at the dinner table, the way she touched her fake pearls, and her obsession with the neighbors finding out about the bank notices. I realize now that her fear wasn't just about money. She knew. She has known about the Florida family for years. Her silence wasn't the result of ignorance. It was a desperate tactical choice. She was clinging to my success, hoping I would provide the cash to keep the facade from crumbling, so she wouldn't have to face the humiliation of being the wife who was replaced in secret. They were both using me as a human shield to protect a lie that had already rotted through their souls. The house in Connecticut isn't a home. It is a stage where they perform for an audience of one me. They needed my money to keep the curtain from falling, to keep the woman in Florida quiet, and to keep the illusion of the successful American patriarch intact. I feel a wave of nausea as I think about the gala, the way Thomas stood there and let people call him a proud father while he was mentally calculating how much of my award money he could funnel to Coral Gables. Every interaction we have had since I was 19 has been a transaction disguised as an emotion. I sit in the darkness, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning and the distant siren of an ambulance on the street below. I realize that the man I have been fighting all these years doesn't even exist. Thomas is just a ghost of a man, a hollow shell filled with the fear of his own exposure. My victory over him at the gala feels cheap now, like winning a race against someone who is already dead on their feet. I pull up a photo from the investigator's file. It shows a young boy, maybe 14 years old, playing soccer in a park in Miami. He has my father's jawline and my brother's eyes. Marcus. He is the innocent byproduct of a man who doesn't know how to be a father unless there is an audience watching. Does Marcus know about me? Does he think Thomas is a hero who travels for business? The layers of the betrayal are so dense that I can feel the weight of them in my lungs. I realize that if I sign that check on Friday, I am becoming a co-conspirator in this fraud. I am helping him hide a human being. I am helping him continue the cycle of abandonment that nearly destroyed me. The conflict in my mind is no longer about revenge. It is about whether I have the courage to burn the entire house down, even if I am standing in the middle of it. Just as I am about to close the file and leave the office, my phone pings with a notification from my security system back at my apartment. Someone is at my door. I check the camera feed and see my mother standing in the hallway looking frantic and disheveled. She isn't wearing her pearls. She looks like she hasn't slept in days. I realize that she hasn't come here to apologize. She has come because the bank or the woman in Florida has made a move she can't control. The secret is leaking out, and she is here to beg me to plug the hole before it drowns her. I watch her on the screen, a woman who traded her daughter's happiness for a seat at a table that was already broken. I realize that the signing on Friday isn't going to happen. The battle has moved from the boardroom to my front door. I stand up and grab my keys, my face a mask of cold resolve. I am done being the bank for their lies. I am done being the daughter who fixes things. As I walk toward the elevator, I realize that I have a new weapon in my hand. I have the power to introduce Marcus to the world. I have the power to give my mother the public humiliation she is so terrified of. But more than that, I have the power to walk away and let the fire consume them both. The tragedy has peaked, and what remains is the cold, hard logic of survival. I reach the ground floor and step out into the New York night, the air tasting of exhaust and freedom. The next conflict isn't just a threat, it is a promise of total destruction. I am going to meet my mother, and for the first time in my life, I am going to tell her exactly what I know. The look on her face when she realizes the check is never coming will be the only inheritance I need. The game has changed, and the hunters are about to become the hunted. I hail a cab, the yellow light cutting through the gloom, and I feel a strange, sharp happiness. The lie is over. Now we see who survives the truth. I drive back to Connecticut through a wall of gray rain that mirrors the cold clarity in my chest. I do not go to the front door where the process servers and the fake smiles live. I walk around the side of the house to the overgrown garden, a place that used to be the crown jewel of my mother's social standing. Now the stone fountain is dry and choked with brown leaves, and the expensive roses have reverted to wild, thorny tangles. I find Beatrice there, standing near a crumbling marble bench, staring at the horizon as if she expects a rescue ship to appear on the edge of the lawn. She looks small against the backdrop of the failing estate. Her hair is perfectly coiffed, but her eyes are vacant, the windows of a house that has already been looted. I do not offer a greeting. I do not ask if she is okay. I stand 10 feet away from her and tell her that I know about the woman in Florida. I tell her I know about Marcus. I tell her I have seen the wire transfers that prove she helped my father steal my future to pay for a second one in another state. The silence that follows is not one of shock. It is the silence of a long-expected confession finally being voiced. Beatrice doesn't deny it. She doesn't even flinch. She simply pulls her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and looks at me with a gaze so hollow it makes my skin crawl. "Why did you stay?" I demand. The question is a jagged blade I have been carrying since I was 19. I ask her how she could sleep in that bed, knowing her husband was building a life with someone else on the back of her daughter's suffering. I ask her how she could watch me get thrown out in the rain while she stayed in the warmth of a lie. The confrontation is no longer about the $450,000 or the deed to a house that is falling apart. It is about the fundamental moral vacuum of the woman who was supposed to be my protector. Beatrice turns to me then, and for the first time in my life, I see the raw, terrifying reality of a certain class of American women who traded their agency for a zip code. Her response is chilling in its honesty. She tells me that she didn't have a fintech degree or a career in Manhattan. She says she didn't have a way to rent an apartment or pay for a car. She had a husband, a reputation, and a seat at the right tables. She tells me that in her world, being a betrayed wife was a social death sentence, but being a silent accomplice was a survival strategy. "You were the only one who got out, Victoria," she whispers. She says it as if my exile was a gift she granted me rather than a trauma she permitted. She claims that by letting my father throw me out, she was actually saving me from the slow, suffocating death of their lifestyle. It is a twisted, monstrous version of love, a mother's attempt to frame her cowardice as a form of sacrifice. I look at her and see the total bankruptcy of my upbringing. She stayed for the house. She stayed for the prestige. She stayed because she was too terrified to exist as a person instead of an ornament. For a fleeting second, I feel a flash of genuine pity. I see the trap she built for herself, a gilded cage with no door. But that pity is incinerated when she takes a step toward me, her face shifting from tragic realization back into the sharp transactional mask of a predator. She reaches out and touches my arm, her fingers cold and trembling. "Has the check cleared yet?" she asks. She doesn't ask if I can ever forgive her. She doesn't ask if I am okay. She wants to know if the money is in the account, so she can call the florist for next month's luncheon. The moral rot is complete. She is so far gone that she can acknowledge her daughter's pain and then immediately ask for a handout in the same breath. I pull my arm away from her touch, as if she were made of fire. The realization hits me with the force of a tidal wave. I cannot save these people. There is no amount of money that can fix a soul that has been sold for property taxes and social standing. I am not here to rescue a family. I am here to manage a decline. I am the executor of a living estate watching the lights go out one by one. I tell her that the check hasn't cleared because I haven't written it yet. I tell her that I am reconsidering the entire arrangement. Beatrice's face contorts with a sudden, ugly panic. She tells me that I can't do that I promised to help. She starts to babble about the neighbors and the shame, her voice rising to a frantic pitch that echoes off the stone walls of the garden. She is no longer the elegant matriarch. She is a drowning woman trying to pull her rescuer under the water with her. The conflict moves from the emotional to the tactical. I tell her that if I do provide the money, she is going to sign a separate agreement. I want her to cooperate with my legal team to ensure that my name is fully removed from every fraudulent account my father created. I tell her that I will provide a small, modest apartment for her in the city. But she will never set foot in this house again once the bank takes the deed. I am offering her a life, but I am stripping her of the identity she stayed for. She looks at the house, then back at me, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. She realizes that her husband has no power left, and her daughter has no mercy. The terms of her survival have changed, and the price is the very reputation she sacrificed me to keep. Just as she is about to answer, we hear the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway. It is not the sleek SUV from earlier. It is a beat-up sedan, and a man I have never seen before is walking toward the garden. He is young with dark hair and a familiar jawline. He is holding a piece of paper and looking around the overgrown grounds with a look of profound confusion. My heart stops. I recognize him from the investigator's photos. It is Marcus. The second family has arrived on the doorstep of the first. He doesn't know who I am, and he clearly doesn't know who the woman standing next to me is. He just knows that his father's checks have stopped coming, and his mother is desperate. The tragedy has collided with the present in the most explosive way possible. I look at my mother and see her face turn a ghostly translucent white. She recognizes him too. The secret she spent 15 years protecting is standing on her lawn asking for directions. The conflict is no longer a quiet negotiation in a garden. It is a public collision of two different lives built on the same lie. I realize that Thomas didn't just fail to pay the bank. He failed to pay the woman in Florida, and she has sent her son to collect. I take a step toward Marcus, but Beatrice grabs my hand, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't," she hisses. But I ignore her. I walk toward the boy who has my father's eyes, the brother I never knew, and I prepare for the next layer of the collapse. The management of the decline has just become a full-scale evacuation. As I reach him, I see my father watching from the second-story window, his face a mask of total, unadulterated horror. The bill has finally come due, and I am the only one who can decide who gets paid. I look at Marcus and tell him that he is at the right house, but he is looking for a man who doesn't exist anymore. The drama is about to go from a family secret to a public disaster, and I am the one holding the match. The morning of the signing brings a sky the color of a bruised slate over Midtown. We meet on the 42nd floor of a law firm where the silence is so expensive you can almost hear the interest accruing in the walls. The conference room is a fortress of glass and brushed steel overlooking a city that does not care about family legacies or the slow death of a reputation. Thomas arrives early wearing a charcoal suit that screams of a comeback he hasn't actually made. He walks into the room with that familiar puffed chest arrogance, the kind of man who thinks that because the money is finally moving, he has regained his throne. He doesn't look like a man who was begging on his knees in a garden 48 hours ago. He looks like a shark who just realized the water is warm again. He offers me a brief, stiff nod, his eyes already scanning the stack of documents on the table. He believes he has won. He thinks he managed to manipulate his way into my bank account by using my own success against me. He assumes that beneath my sharp clothes and executive title, I am still the little girl who wants her father to tell her she did a good job. The lead attorney, a man named Sterling who has seen enough divorces and bankruptcies to fill a library, slides the main agreement toward my father. Thomas doesn't even reach for his reading glasses. He is so eager to see the $450,000 hit his escrow account that he treats the fine print as a mere formality. He believes I wouldn't dare betray him in a room full of professionals. He thinks the bond of blood is a legal shield that protects him from the consequences of his own theft. I watch him with a predatory stillness, my hands folded on the glass table, my breathing slow and rhythmic. I have spent 11 years learning the language of contracts and the hidden traps of the American financial system. While he was playing the role of the big man in Connecticut, I was studying the architecture of the cage he was about to step into. He picks up the heavy fountain pen, his hand steady, and signs his name with the flourish of a man who thinks he is reclaiming his kingdom. The ink is still wet when the trap snaps shut. As the pen hits the paper, I lean forward just enough to change the temperature of the room. I ask him how Elena and Marcus are doing. The name Marcus hangs in the air like a sudden violent frost. Thomas freezes, the pen still gripped in his hand, his eyes widening until I can see the whites of his desperation. The mask of arrogance doesn't just slip, it disintegrates. The lawyer, sensing the shift from a transaction to a massacre, suddenly finds the wood grain of the floor extremely interesting. Thomas tries to find his voice, his throat working like a landed fish. He stammers that he doesn't know what I am talking about, that I am being hysterical or confused. I don't let him finish the lie. I tell him that I know about the Coral Gables property. I know about the tuition payments and the quiet settlements. I know that the $450,000 isn't just for the mortgage, but to buy the silence of the second family he has been hiding for 15 years. I inform him that he'd just signed an accelerated loan agreement. I point to the specific clause on page 14, the one he didn't read because he was too busy dreaming of his own salvation. I explain the terms in a voice that is devoid of any emotion, a voice that belongs entirely to the vice president of a fintech firm. The loan is tied to a strict behavioral covenant. If he misses a single payment, or if he has a single instance of communication with the woman in Florida, the Connecticut house does not go to him. It immediately reverts to a charitable trust I have already established for homeless youth. I tell him that the very ground he stands on is now a leash. He has sold his house to me, and I'm allowing him to live there as a guest of my charity, provided he never mentions my name in a fraudulent account again. He is no longer the owner of his identity. He is a tenant in my victory. Thomas looks at the document, and then back at me, his face turning a sickly, translucent shade of gray. He realizes that the $450,000 is not a lifeline. It is a cage. He has traded his deed for a loan he can never truly repay under these conditions. He starts to yell, calling me a monster and a traitor, his voice echoing off the glass walls. He yells that no daughter should do this to her father. I remind him that no father should use his daughter's social security number as a garbage disposal for his bad debts. I remind him that he was the one who taught me that self-reliance is the only inheritance. I am simply being self-reliant. I am protecting my assets and my name from a liability that has become too expensive to maintain. The hierarchy of the family hasn't just been flipped, it has been demolished and rebuilt with me at the summit. The conflict moves from the legal to the psychological. Thomas turns to the lawyer, demanding to know if this is legal, if he can rescind his signature. Sterling looks up, his expression one of professional pity. He tells my father that the document is perfectly binding and that the terms, while aggressive, are entirely standard for a high-risk bridge loan between private parties. He reminds Thomas that he signed a waiver stating he had the opportunity to review the document with independent counsel. The trap is airtight. There is no exit, no loophole, and no mercy. My father collapses into his leather chair, the air leaving his lungs in a long, ragged hiss. He looks at his hands as if he doesn't recognize them. He is a man who has spent 30 years being the smartest person in the room, and he has just been outplayed by the person he thought he could ignore. Just as the signing concludes and the tension seems to reach its peak, the door to the conference room opens. It is my mother, Beatrice. But she isn't alone. She is followed by a woman I have only seen in grainy investigator photos. It is Elena. She is younger than my mother with tired eyes and a look of fierce, protective determination. She isn't here to hide anymore. She walks to the table and ignores Thomas entirely, looking straight at me. She tells me that the checks for Marcus's health insurance bounced this morning. She says she doesn't care about the settlements or the secrets. She wants to know if the boy she raised is going to have a future. The collision I expected in Connecticut has followed us to Manhattan. My mother is standing by the door, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shame, realized in the presence of the woman who shared her husband's life for a decade. The new conflict is no longer about the house or the loan. It is about a moral debt that is far larger than $450,000. Elena isn't a villain. She is another victim of my father's sprawling fraud. She thought he was a widower who worked in international trade. She thought her life was built on a foundation of love, not a series of stolen wire transfers from a girl in New York. I look at Thomas, who is now cowering between the two women whose lives he dismantled. He has no words left. I realize that my legal trap was designed to punish him, but it doesn't account for the human wreckage he has left behind. I have the money, and I have the deed, but now I have two families looking at me to decide who survives the next hour. I stand up, the weight of the room shifting onto my shoulders once again. The signing was just the beginning. The real settlement is about to be negotiated, and the price is going to be higher than anything written in that contract. I look at Elena and then at my mother, and I realize that for the first time in history, the women in this family are the only ones with anything left to say. The next conflict is a war for the truth, and I am the only one holding the microphone. The glass-walled silence of the law firm is shattered as the heavy mahogany door swings open and Julian stumbles in, looking like a man who has spent the last 48 hours vibrating with panic and cheap stimulants. He ignores the two women standing by the doorway and the wreckage of our father at the head of the table. He marches straight toward me, his face twisted into a mask of desperate cornered aggression. He is waving a thick stack of printed bank statements, the ink blurred as if they were grabbed in a hurry from a basement printer. He tells the room to stop the proceedings. He claims that I am not the hero of this story, and that my hands are just as dirty as the man I am trying to bankrupt. Julian turns to the lawyers and the stunned audience, his voice cracking with a high-pitched, manic energy. He shouts that he has proof I stole my initial startup capital from our father's secret accounts 5 years ago. He calls me a thief who used a family crisis to launder stolen money into a legitimate fintech empire. He thinks he has found the silver bullet. He believes that by exposing a financial discrepancy from my past, he can blackmail me into giving him a seat at the table, or at least a cut of the $450,000. This was Julian's role for our entire childhood. The informant, the one who would whisper in our father's ear to ensure I stayed in the doghouse while he stayed in the penthouse. He is using the same old tactics, trying to drag me down into the mud so he can feel tall again. He tells the room that I took $200,000 from a dormant account in 2021, the exact amount I used to launch my first investment platform. He sneers that the visionary of the year is nothing more than a common embezzler who robbed her own father while he wasn't looking. Thomas looks up, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes, as he realizes his golden son might have just handed him away to invalidate the loan agreement. I do not panic. I do not even stand up. I lean back in the ergonomic leather chair and watch my brother unravel. The laughter starts low in my throat, a dry, rhythmic sound that makes Julian stop mid-sentence. I reach into my own briefcase and pull out a blue folder that contains the one thing Julian never bothered to acquire: the truth. I slide a document across the table that bears a government seal from the Department of Revenue. I tell him that I didn't steal that money. I reclaimed it. I show the room the paper trail that proves the $200,000 was sitting in an account Thomas had opened using my identity when I was 21. It was my money legally tied to my social security number, which our father had been using to hide his own capital gains from the IRS. Thomas had forgotten that once I became a licensed financial officer, I gained the tools to track every cent attached to my name. I simply moved my own legal property into a new account and used it to build something real. I tell Julian that he is holding proof of our father's tax evasion, not my theft. The silence that follows is the sound of a final permanent incineration. Julian looks at the papers, his eyes darting back and forth as he tries to find a loophole that doesn't exist. He realizes that the blackmail he spent all night preparing is just another indictment of the man he was trying to protect. He has no leverage. He has no future. He has spent his entire life being the mouthpiece for a father who is now a ghost, and he has just realized that the sister he tried to destroy is the only one who can pay his rent. I look at him and see a beggar in a $3,000 suit. He is the golden child who stayed behind to feast on a legacy that turned out to be a pile of ash. The sibling bond that I had secretly hoped to salvage the tiny spark of shared history we had left is officially extinguished. He didn't come here to save me or the family. He came here to scavenge. I tell Julian to sit down, and for the first time in his life, he obeys me without a word of protest. I look at him with a cold, clinical pity that is far worse than anger. I tell him that I am through subsidizing his delusions. I am through paying for the Porsche he can't drive and the apartment he doesn't deserve. I reach into my bag and pull out an envelope. Inside is a one-way coach ticket to Los Angeles and a business card for a shipping firm in San Pedro. I tell him that I have a contact there who needs a junior clerk to manage inventory in a warehouse. It is a grueling, unglamorous job that pays $45,000 a year and requires him to be at a desk by 6 in the morning. I tell him he can take the ticket and the job, or he can stay here in New York and see how long he lasts when the bank seizes his belongings and the creditors find his new address. Take it or leave it, I say. The transition is jarring. The Prince of Connecticut looks at the ticket as if it were a death warrant. He looks at Thomas, but our father is staring at the wall, unable to even acknowledge the son who just failed him for the last time. Julian realizes he is truly alone. He reaches out with a trembling hand and takes the envelope, his pride finally breaking under the weight of his reality. He doesn't say thank you. He doesn't say he is sorry. He just tucks it into his pocket and slumps in his chair, a defeated man who has finally been forced to join the world of the self-reliant. I have cleared the board of my father's arrogance and my brother's greed, but the air in the room is still heavy. The conflict hasn't ended. It has simply moved to the people standing by the door. I turn my attention back to Elena and the boy Marcus, who has been watching this entire scene with a look of quiet, dignified horror. He sees the family he was told was prestigious and successful, and he sees us for what we are, a group of strangers fighting over a corpse. I realize that while I have dealt with Julian, I still haven't addressed the woman who raised my father's second son. My mother is still weeping in the corner, her fake pearls a mocking reminder of the life she is losing. The drama is shifting from the financial to the human. I have the power to send Julian to California and Thomas to a life of charity, but I have no idea what to do with the boy who shares my blood but none of my scars. The new conflict emerges when Elena speaks again, her voice steady and demanding. She tells me that she doesn't want my charity, and she doesn't want my brother's ticket. She wants the truth about why my father told her that I was the one who refused to let him see Marcus. She reveals that for years, Thomas told his Florida family that he wanted to bring them to New York, but that his eldest daughter, the cold and heartless Victoria, had a legal injunction against him that prevented him from introducing his two worlds. My heart stops. My father didn't just steal my money. He used me as the villain in his second life to explain away his own cowardice. He made me the monster in Marcus's bedtime stories so he could keep his two lies separate. I look at Thomas and see the depths of a man who would rather be hated through his daughter than be seen for who he truly is. The war for the narrative has just begun, and the boy standing in front of me is the one who has been told I am the enemy. I have to decide if I'm going to prove him right, or if I'm going to tear down the last of my father's lies, even if it means letting the whole world see the mess he made. I take a step toward Marcus, and for the first time I don't feel like a vice president. I feel like a sister. The final evening at the Connecticut estate arrives with a cold, clinical efficiency. The grand dining room, once a theater for my father's carefully staged performances of American prosperity, feels like a hollowed-out ribcage. There are no caterers today. There is no staff to buff the silver or decant the wine. The large Persian rug that used to muffle our footsteps has been rolled up and hauled away, leaving the bare hardwood floors to echo every movement with a sharp, accusing sound. I have organized this meal as a final formality before the charitable trust assumes control of the property at midnight. It is the last time the three of us will sit together in this space as anything resembling a family. Thomas sits at the head of the long table, his eyes darting toward the empty spaces where the antique sideboards used to stand. Beatrice is to his right, her posture still rigid, but her spirit seems to have evaporated, leaving only a brittle shell behind. I sit opposite my father, the woman who owns the chair he is sitting in. The atmosphere is heavy with the weight of things unsaid, yet the dialogue that does emerge is sharp and biting. Thomas tries to fill the void with a desperate dark humor, making jokes about how the echo in the room finally matches the quality of our conversations. He laughs at a memory of a summer party from 10 years ago, describing the champagne and the local dignitaries as if those moments were built on something other than credit and lies. He speaks of the good old days with a nostalgic fervor that makes my skin crawl. I remind him that during those good old days, he was already using my name to shield his losses. I point out that the champagne he remembers was paid for by the tuition money he stole from me. The humor is a jagged edge we use to cut at one another, a way to vent the pressure, without admitting to the total collapse of our reality. Beatrice chimes in with a comment about how much easier the house will be to clean now that there is nothing in it, her voice trembling with a sarcastic edge that is the only defense she has left. We eat a simple meal on mismatched plates I found in the back of a cupboard, the last remnants of a life that has been liquidated. As the meal draws to a close, Thomas stands up, reaching for a glass of water since the wine cellar has been emptied and sold to a private collector. He tries to reclaim a shred of his old dignity by proposing a toast. He raises his glass and looks at me, his face a mask of practiced hollow warmth. He toasts to success and to the resilience of the family name. He speaks about how we have all faced challenges and come out stronger on the other side. It is a staggering display of delusion, a final attempt to frame this disaster as a strategic victory. I do not move. I do not lift my glass. I sit with my hands folded on the table watching him until the smile dies on his face and he slowly lowers the water. I tell him that success is not the word I would use to describe the sight of a man begging his daughter for a place to sleep. I inform him that the resilience he mentions is actually just a lack of other options. Then I deliver the final blow. I tell them that I have sold the furniture. Every mahogany desk, every leather-bound book, and every heirloom painting has been cataloged and shipped to auction houses across the country. I tell them that by tomorrow morning this house will be an empty shell, mirroring the relationships that were nurtured within its walls. I have left them their beds, and nothing else. I want them to feel the emptiness of the space they fought so hard to keep. I want them to wake up in a house that offers no comfort, only the memory of the things they traded for a reputation they never actually possessed. The silence that follows is not peaceful. It is a heavy, suffocating tragedy that settles over the room like a shroud. Thomas looks at the blank spots on the walls where the portraits of his ancestors used to hang, realizing that his legacy has been reduced to a set of line items on a bill of sale. Beatrice begins to pick at a loose thread on her sweater, her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to face the reality of the void I have created. We are three strangers, tied together by a debt that can never be truly repaid, sitting in a monument to our collective failures. The house is no longer a fortress. It is a museum of what happens when greed is the only thing holding a family together. My father's arrogance has been replaced by a quiet, vibrating fear of the morning, and my mother's vanity has been stripped away to reveal a woman who has no idea who she is without her things. I stand up to leave the sound of my chair scraping against the floor, sounding like a scream in the quiet room. I tell them that the keys to the apartment I secured for them are on the kitchen counter and that the movers will arrive at 8 o'clock to take their personal belongings. Thomas doesn't look at me. He asks in a small, broken voice if I am really going to let the neighbors see them leave like this. I tell him that the neighbors have their own problems and that his reputation is a ghost he can no longer afford to feed. I walk out of the dining room and toward the front door, my heels clicking on the bare wood with a final rhythmic certainty. I have done what I came to do. I have dismantled the theater of their lives and replaced it with a cold, hard truth. But as I reach the foyer, the front door is suddenly pushed open. Julian is standing there, but he isn't alone. He has a look of wild, unhinged triumph on his face, and he is holding a legal folder that I recognize instantly. It is the original deed to the property, the one Thomas claimed was lost in a fire years ago. Julian has a woman with him, a sharp-faced attorney I have never seen before. He laughs, the sound echoing through the empty house, and tells me that I might own the loan, but I don't own the land. He reveals that our father had secretly deeded the ground itself to a secondary trust in Julian's name when he was 18, a final insurance policy that even the bank didn't know about. The house belongs to me, but the dirt it sits on belongs to the brother I just tried to exile. The new conflict is a legal nightmare that threatens to undo everything I have worked for. If Julian owns the land, he can charge me rent for the house to exist on it, or he can force a partition sale that would drag us into court for years. My brother isn't going to California. He has found a way to squat on the one thing I wanted to take from them. I look at Thomas, and for the first time I see a flicker of the old predatory spark in his eyes. He knew. He let me pay the $450,000 to save the house, knowing that Julian still held the ultimate leverage over the ground. They have played me one last time, using my own desire for closure to trap me in a permanent legal war with my own brother. I stand in the empty foyer, the cold wind blowing in from the open door, and I realize that the Last Supper was just a distraction for the next betrayal. The drama hasn't just increased, it has become a cycle of revenge that I am now legally bound to. I look at Julian and realize that the golden child didn't become a beggar, he became a landlord. The war for the estate has just entered a new, more vicious phase, and the silence of the empty house is about to be replaced by the sound of 1,000 new lies. I take a breath and prepare for the next move, knowing that in this family, the only way to win is to make sure no one is left standing to collect the prize. The cold air of the empty foyer rushes past me as I watch Julian gloat over his piece of dirt. The triumph on his face is a grotesque mirror of our father's younger years, but I do not give him the satisfaction of an argument. I realize in this moment that the battle for the land is a trap designed to keep me tethered to this graveyard. If I stay to fight for the soil, I am still playing their game. I am still the daughter waiting for permission to exist. I turn away from my brother and his sharp-faced attorney walking up the stairs for the very last time. The house is a skeleton stripped of its mahogany and silk, and my footsteps on the bare risers sound like the ticking of a clock that has finally run out of time. I reach the guest room where I have spent the last few nights and pull out my one suitcase. It is the same worn leather bag I used at 19 when the locks were changed on my life. It is scuffed and out of fashion, a relic of a girl who had nothing but her own name. I pack my things with a slow, deliberate precision. I do not take a single souvenir from this place. I do not want the ghosts. I walk back down to the main floor, my heels striking the wood with a finality that Julian and Thomas cannot ignore. They are still standing in the foyer arguing about the logistics of the trust, but they fall silent as I approach. I walk past them into the gutted living room toward the fireplace mantel that was once the center of our family's curated image. I reach into my pocket and pull out a small gold leaf box I purchased in the city. Inside is the $50 bill my father gave me 11 years ago, the one I kept as a reminder of exactly how much I was worth to him. I place the box on the dusty marble ledge. Thomas looks at it, his eyes narrowing as he recognizes the currency of his own cruelty. I tell him that I am returning his investment with interest. I tell him that he was right all those years ago about self-reliance being the only thing he owed me. but that he failed to realize I would use that grit to buy the very ground he stands on. I look him in the eye and tell him that I do not need his inheritance, because I am the inheritance. I am the only thing of value this family ever produced, and I am taking myself off the market. The expression on my father's face is a complicated map of grief and realization. He has the money to stay. The $450,000 has cleared the bank and his son owns the land, but the victory is hollow and cold. He looks at the empty rooms and then at me, and I see the moment he understands the magnitude of his loss. He didn't just lose a house or a reputation. He lost the daughter who made his money worth having. He lost the only person who was strong enough to face his truths and still show up at the table. He reaches out a hand, a trembling gesture of a man who has finally realized he is alone, but I step back. There is no warmth left for him here. I have managed the decline to its natural conclusion. I walk toward the front door, ignoring Julian's protests about the legal partition. I don't care about the land. He can have the dirt. He can spend the rest of his life trying to build a new lie on a foundation of mud. I am done being the architect of their survival. I step out onto the porch, and the Connecticut mist clings to my skin like a shroud. The overgrown lawn and the hidden for sale sign are no longer my responsibility. I walk to my car, the engine turning over with a smooth, powerful hum that cuts through the silence of the dying estate. As I put the vehicle in gear, I look back at the second-story window. Thomas is standing there, framed by the dark glass, a small and broken man peering out from a large and empty house. He looks like a museum exhibit of a life that was lived for all the wrong reasons. The loss is total because it is internal. He has preserved the structure of his life, but he has destroyed the soul of it. I press the accelerator, and the sound of the luxury car driving away into the New York night is the only goodbye I offer. The conflict ends not with a bang or a courtroom drama, but with the quiet sound of a woman choosing her own future over a haunted past. The drive back to Manhattan is a transition into a world where I am the only authority. The lights of the George Washington Bridge emerge from the darkness like a crown of diamonds. I feel a strange, weightless happiness. The debt is paid. The ledger is closed. I am no longer Victoria the daughter or Victoria the creditor. I am just Victoria. I reach my apartment in Hudson Yards and sit in the silence of my own space, looking at the city that doesn't know my name, but respects my power. I realize that the departure wasn't just about leaving a house. It was about leaving the identity of the victim behind. I am free. But as I begin to unpack my suitcase, my fingers brush against something in the side pocket that I didn't put there. It is a small, handwritten note on a piece of stationery from the law firm. I open it expecting a final threat from Julian or a plea from my mother. Instead, the handwriting is unfamiliar, elegant, and ancient. The note says that the charitable trust I established for the house has already received its first major donation from an anonymous source in Europe. It isn't money. It is a collection of titles to properties in Florida and New York that were supposedly lost in the 1980s. My heart stops as I read the signature at the bottom. It is the name of my father's sister, the aunt I was told had died in an institution before I was born. The note says she has been watching my rise and that the house in Connecticut was never the real prize. The real inheritance is a legal document currently held in a vault in Zurich, a document that proves my father never owned a single asset he claimed to possess. Every cent he ever spent belonged to a woman he tried to erase. The new conflict hits me with the force of a physical blow. If my father never owned the assets, then the $450,000 I just paid to save the house was sent into a legal void. I haven't just lost my money. I have accidentally triggered an international audit of a decades-long fraud that involves my name and my firm. My aunt isn't reaching out to help me. She is reaching out to inform me that the fire I just started is about to burn down my own office. The departure wasn't the end. It was the moment the fuse reached the explosives. I look at my phone, seeing 30 missed calls from my CEO. The New York night is no longer a sanctuary. It is a hunting ground. I realized that Thomas wasn't the only one keeping secrets, and the woman who really owns the family legacy is coming to collect everything I built. I stand in the middle of my perfect apartment and realize that I am not just the inheritance. I am the target. The drama has moved beyond the family and into the global stage, and the next hour will decide if I am a visionary or the next casualty of the name I tried so hard to save. I reach for my laptop, the screen glowing like a warning flare. The war has only just begun. The adrenaline that sustained me through the demolition of my father's empire has finally dissipated, leaving behind a silence that no longer feels like a threat. 3 weeks have passed since I drove away from the Connecticut estate, and the chaos of the international audit has settled into a rhythmic legal procedure. I am back in my office high above the frantic pulse of Manhattan, watching the sunset bleed into the Hudson River. The air in the room is different now. It is no longer thick with the desperate need to prove my worth or the sharp, jagged edges of a decade-old resentment. I feel a strange sense of happiness. It is not the bubbly, fleeting joy of a celebration, but the heavy and solid weight of closure. It is the feeling of a mountain climber who has finally reached the plateau and realized they no longer have to fight the gravity of their own past. I have navigated the audit, separated my firm's assets from the toxic legacy of Thomas, and emerged with my reputation intact. I am the survivor of a storm I didn't start, and for the first time I am breathed without checking the horizon for a new betrayal. My desk is clear of the predatory loan agreements and the fraudulent bank statements that defined my life for the last month. In their place is a single hand-addressed envelope postmarked from Florida. It is not from Elena, and it is not a request for money. I open it with steady fingers, expecting another layer of the tragedy to unfold. Instead, I find a sheet of notebook paper covered in the round, careful handwriting of a child. It is from a young girl named Maya. She is 12 years old. She is the sister I never knew I had, the youngest branch of the family tree that Thomas tried so hard to hide in the shadows of the Sunshine State. She writes that she saw my face on the news during the gala coverage. She says she doesn't want a settlement or a trust fund or a seat at a table she's never seen. She just wants to meet the woman who looks like her. She wants to know if I have the same laugh and if I also struggle with algebra. She asks for nothing but a chance to speak to someone who shares her blood but none of her father's lies. The realization hits me with a quiet, profound force. For years, I viewed the Florida family as a financial liability, a secondary fraud, or a weapon used to hurt my mother. I saw them as the evidence of my father's moral bankruptcy. But looking at this letter, I see that the tragedy of Thomas's life has created something unexpected, a new connection that I can actually nurture. Maya is not a pawn in a game of legacy and reputation. She is a girl who has been living in the same fog of deception that I escaped. The wide range of emotions I have carried, the rage, the grief, the cold, calculating vengeance, settles into a singular, quiet resolve. I realize that I have the power to break the cycle. I will not be the ghost that haunts her life, and I will not be the sister who disappears into the New York night. I will be the safety net that our father never provided for either of us. I will be the truth in a world built on his fictions. I think back to the girl I was at 19, standing on that rain-slicked driveway with a $50 bill and a heart full of holes. I remember the terror of the first night in the city and the crushing weight of being truly alone. I can see now that my father's greatest crime wasn't the theft of the money or the identity. It was the theft of the idea that we belonged to one another. He treated people like assets to be managed or liabilities to be liquidated. He saw Maya as a secret to be kept, and he saw me as a bank to be robbed. By reaching out to her, I am finally destroying the last of his influence. I am taking the shattered pieces of his dual reality and gluing them together into something that resembles a family. I pick up a pen and begin to write back. I tell her that I struggle with algebra too. I tell her that I would love to meet her, and that the next time she sees my face on the screen, she should know that she has a home in New York whenever she needs it. The internal shift is complete. I am no longer defined by what Thomas took from me, but by what I am willing to give to someone else. I feel a lightness in my chest that I haven't known since before that final tuition argument in Connecticut. I have managed the decline of my parents' lives and moved them into the modest apartment they can afford, but I have also cleared a space in my own life for a sister who deserves better than a shadow for a father. I am the inheritance, not because of the money I saved or the deed I took, but because I am the only one who learned how to love without a contract. I look out at the city lights and feel a deep, abiding peace. I have won the war, and the peace treaty is written in a 12-year-old's handwriting. But as I am about to seal the envelope, my assistant buzzes the intercom, her voice sounding strained and hesitant. She tells me that there is a woman in the lobby who refuses to leave. She says the woman claims to be my aunt, the one from the Zurich note, and she has a group of men with her wearing federal badges. My heart doesn't race this time. It simply goes cold. I realize that the anonymous donation to the charitable trust wasn't a gift of grace, it was a Trojan horse. My aunt didn't just want to inform me of the fraud. She wanted to use the trust to move the very offshore assets that the government has been hunting for 40 years. By accepting the management of the estate and creating that trust, I have inadvertently become the primary signatory for a global money laundering operation that predates my birth. My father wasn't the mastermind, he was the decoy. The real architect of the family legacy is standing in my lobby, and she has brought the Department of Justice with her to ensure that I take the fall for a crime that spans generations. The conflict hasn't settled. It has simply evolved into its final, most lethal form. I look at the letter to Maya and realize that the safety net I promised her might be a lie before the ink even dries. I am not just a visionary or a sister. I am the last piece of a puzzle that my aunt has been waiting to solve for 3 decades. She didn't want the house or the money. She wanted a clean, successful name to attach to the filth of the past so she could walk away into the sunset. I realize that every move I made to save myself has led me directly into her trap. I stand up and walk toward the door, my face a mask of iron. I am not going to hide, and I am not going to beg. If the family legacy is a fire, then I am going to make sure it burns everyone involved. I reach for the handle knowing that the men downstairs aren't here to talk. They are here to end the story. I take a final look at the New York skyline and prepare for the confrontation that will decide if I spend the next 20 years in a boardroom or a cell. The drama has reached its absolute peak, and the payoff is a mirror held up to the very idea of the American dream. I open the door and walk toward the elevator, the sound of my heels, the only thing I can hear in the sudden terrifying silence. The high-speed elevator descends toward the lobby of my firm, and I catch my reflection in the brushed metal doors. I do not look like a woman who is about to be arrested. I look like a woman who is about to witness the final act of a play I helped write. When the doors slide open, the lobby is teeming with federal agents and windbreakers, their presence a sharp contrast to the polished marble and the hushed prestige of Hudson Yards. Standing at the center of the chaos is a woman who looks like a version of me from 30 years in the future. She is draped in a tailored navy silk wrap, her silver hair cut into a sharp, uncompromising bob. This is the Aunt Thomas spent my entire childhood describing as a tragic cautionary tale. He told me she was mentally unstable, a woman who had lost her mind and her fortune before dying in a sanitarium in upstate New York. He used her name as a ghost story to keep me obedient, a warning of what happens to women in this family who try to be too independent. But the woman standing in front of me is vibrant, wealthy, and very much alive. The lead agent steps forward, holding a folder of the Zurich documents I discovered in my office. He looks at me, and then at the woman by his side. He doesn't reach for handcuffs. He reaches for a pen. He asks if we are ready to finalize the transfer of the charitable trust assets. I nod my face, remaining a mask of professional calm. The surprise that would make an audience gasp is not my arrest, but the realization that this trust was never about homeless youth or a tax haven. It is a legal entity called the VV Legacy Fund, and I have co-owned it with my mother's sister since the day I turned 21. My aunt, whose name is Vivian, walks toward me with a smile that contains a decade of shared secrets. She doesn't hug me. She shakes my hand with the grip of a business partner who has just closed the deal of a century. She looks at the agents and tells them that the audit is complete and that every cent Thomas moved through my name has been successfully traced back to the capital he stole from her inheritance in the 1980s. The entire 11-year exile was not a tragedy of abandonment. It was a long-game sting operation coordinated by the two women Thomas underestimated most. I didn't just figure it out alone in a walk-up apartment in Queens. I had an angel investor who knew exactly where the bodies were buried because she was the one who survived the first murder. While I was working those shifts at the diner, I was also meeting Vivian in quiet corners of the city, learning the architecture of the fraud my father was building. She provided the initial capital for my fintech platform using the very money Thomas thought he had successfully siphoned off from her estate. We let him think he was winning. We let him think he had successfully exiled his daughter and silenced his sister. We waited for him to become desperate enough to reach for a lifeline that was actually a noose. The $450,000 loan wasn't an act of mercy or even a hostile takeover in the traditional sense. It was the final legal maneuver required to force him to sign the deed over to an entity that was already controlled by his primary victim. The scene shifts back to the Connecticut estate for the final closing. Thomas is there sitting on a folding chair in the middle of the empty living room looking like a prisoner of war. He sees Vivian walk through the front door, and his jaw drops so far it looks like it might unhinge. He stammers her name, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze of terror. He looks at me and then at her, the realization dawning on him that his unprofitable daughter and his insane sister have been a unified front for over a decade. He realized that the money he spent to save the house was actually used to pay the legal fees for the audit that is now dismantling his life. He isn't just broke, he has been systematically played by his own blood. Every move he made to sabotage my scholarship, every fraudulent account he opened, and every lie he told Elena in Florida was being documented and weaponized against him by the women he thought he had discarded. Vivian walks to the center of the room and looks at the empty walls. She tells Thomas that the furniture he sold to an anonymous collector was actually purchased by her, and it is currently being moved back into the brownstone she owns in Brooklyn. She tells him that the house in Connecticut is being signed over to the trust today, and that the first order of business for the new owners is his immediate eviction. She speaks with a cold, elegant precision that makes my father look like a bumbling amateur. Thomas looks at me, his eyes pleading for a shred of the daughterly affection he spent 30 years trying to kill. He asks how I could do this to him. He asks where the grace is in this outcome. I tell him that grace is a luxury for people who tell the truth. I tell him that he wanted me to learn self-reliance, and I have simply graduated with honors. The satisfaction is absolute as the final documents are stamped, and the federal agents begin to escort Thomas and Julian toward the cars waiting in the driveway. Julian is still clutching his one-way ticket to California, a look of stunned mute horror on his face as he realizes the land he thought he owned was actually a fraudulent deed Thomas created to trick him as well. My father is being taken in for questioning regarding the wire fraud, a process that will likely end in a plea deal that strips him of every remaining asset. My mother Beatrice is already in the back of a car heading toward the small apartment I provided, finally forced to live the life of the reputation she was so afraid to lose. They are gone, and for the first time in my life the air in the house is clear. I stand on the porch with Vivian watching the taillights of the government vehicles disappear into the Connecticut mist. The overgrown lawn and the crumbling fountain don't look sad anymore. They look like a canvas. Vivian asks me what I plan to do next. I tell her that I have a flight to Florida in the morning. I have a sister to meet and a story to tell her that doesn't involve any villains. I tell her that I am going to make sure Marcus and Maya have a future that isn't built on a foundation of stolen dreams. Vivian nods and hands me the keys to the estate, telling me that the ground is finally clean. I look out at the dark woods, and then I turn to the camera, the shadows of the porch highlighting the sharp, successful lines of my face. I think about the 19-year-old girl with the $50 bill and the heart full of holes, and I wish she could see me now. I think about the man who thought he could use me as a trash bin for his failures, and I feel a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. I smile a slow and steady expression of a woman who has finally claimed her own life. I whisper into the quiet New York night that self-reliance is a beautiful thing. The screen fades to black as the sound of the wind through the trees replaces the drama of the last decade. The story is over, and for the first time, everyone got exactly what they earned. The silence that follows the collapse of a dynasty is surprisingly quiet. Standing on the porch of the house that once felt like a prison, I realized that the weight I had carried for 11 years wasn't just my father's greed, it was the expectation that I had to be the one to fix him. I watched the taillights of the federal vehicles fade into the Connecticut mist, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to look back. I had spent my 20s running away from a ghost, only to find out that the ghost was a puppet I was helping to move. By choosing to walk away, I didn't just win a legal battle, I won the right to own my own narrative. My bank account is full, but my heart is finally light, because it is empty of the toxic loyalty that almost drowned me. As I sat on the flight to Florida the next morning watching the Manhattan skyline shrink into a grid of toy buildings, I reflected on the wreckage left behind. The American dream my father preached was a predatory illusion, a hollow shell built on the backs of the women he thought he could discard. But Vivian and I proved that the same grit he tried to weaponize against us was the very thing that would dismantle him. This journey has been a masterclass in survival, and as I prepare to meet Maya and Marcus, I've distilled the chaos of my life into 5 fundamental truths. 1. Self-reliance is not a punishment. It is a superpower. My father intended for my exile to be a lesson in suffering, but it became my greatest asset. When you have nothing but your own name and your own hands, you build a foundation that no one can kick out from under you. 2. Family is a choice, not a biological mandate. Blood might be thicker than water, but it is also easier to poison. I found more loyalty in an insane aunt and a girl in a Florida notebook than I ever did in the house that raised me. You are allowed to fire your family if they no longer serve your growth. 3. Silence is an accomplice to fraud. My mother's brittle vanity was just as destructive as my father's active theft. By staying silent to protect her reputation, she became the architect of her own demise. If you see a lie being built, you have a moral obligation to grab a hammer. 4. Revenge is best served as a balance sheet. I could have screamed, I could have cried, or I could have begged. Instead, I studied the numbers. In the modern world, the most effective way to defeat an oppressor is to understand the legal and financial structures they hide behind. 5. Your value is not determined by your past, but by your resilience. Thomas tried to tell me I was unprofitable at 19. I spent a decade believing him even as I succeeded. The internal shift only happened when I realized that I wasn't the victim of his story, I was the hero of mine. I am no longer the girl on the driveway. I am the woman who owns the driveway. As I step off the plane into the humid Florida air, I feel a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy. If this story of betrayal and triumph resonated with you, please subscribe to Hazel Tells Stories. Drop a comment below with the word resilience if you've ever had to build your own safety net. Thank you for walking this path with me. My name is Victoria, and I am finally home.